You've made it to the final day of the national finals. I'm Diana Owen. I'm a professor of political science at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C.
Welcome and congratulations. My name is Tom Tinder, and I'm an attorney from Charleston, West Virginia.
Congratulations. I'm a professor of political science in the U.S. Naval Academy, retired.
And if you would now please introduce yourselves and your teacher.
Excited to meet you all. We're excited to be here on this wonderful afternoon. We're Irvington High School's Unit 6 team. My name is Surya Teja Mandadi.
My name is Andrew Cheng.
And I'm Vignesh Santal Kumar, electing the judges, our coach, Mr. Martinez, and the timekeeper.
Great, thank you. So the question for today is number 2. President Dwight D. Eisenhower said, "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist." Do you agree or disagree? Why? What disagreements did the founders have about a standing army, and are they relevant today? To what extent should there be an international U.S. military presence? Please begin.
We agree with President Eisenhower's statement that since 1961, the military-industrial complex has rapidly expanded, resulting in negative consequences. The military-industrial complex is a combination of private and public forces surrounding our military policy and defense industry. From 1961 to today, the defense budget nearly doubled from $415 to $700 billion, accounting for inflation, and the US spends more militarily than the next 10 countries combined. Companies in the military-industrial complex like Northrop Grumman, Boeing, and Lockheed Martin have been able to increase their profits and influence, spending about $126 million on lobbying and employing over 770 lobbyists in 2018 alone.
The military-industrial complex tries to influence a military-centric foreign policy, leading to U.S. involvement in areas such as Iraq, which have cost the U.S. trillions of dollars and thousands of lives, while subsequently destabilizing these regions. One company, Halliburton, gained $39.5 billion in contracts from the Iraq War. More recently, the U.S. sold weapons and gear to Saudi Arabia in its war with Yemen, where Saudi Arabia has been accused of committing war crimes.
The military-industrial complex does have some upsides. These companies typically provide manufacturing jobs, as over 10% of U.S. factory output goes towards weapon making. Additionally, technological advancements like the internet, GPS, and the EpiPen were all results of innovation in military research.
This massive expansion in the American military-industrial complex has resulted in one of the world's most powerful standing armies. Many founders would not only oppose this broad expansion, but would oppose the concept of a standing army itself. This sentiment spread as a result of the British soldiers who were stationed strictly to enforce Parliament's unjust taxes on the colonists.
In his speech to the Virginia Ratifying Convention, Patrick Henry argued, "A standing army we shall have, also, to execute the execrable commands of tyranny." Other founders agreed with the potential tyrannical nature of a standing army, but understood the need for defense against foreign threats. In Federalist 4, John Jay argues for a centralized singular government with a national army that would better deter against international powers.
The increased influence of the military-industrial complex today does validate some concerns of the founders. However, they could not foresee the rapid technological advancement and globalization transforming the US into a global superpower. This newfound position at the international stage requires a standing army to preserve global alliances, economic interests, and humanitarian values.
Despite this prominent international role, the US should lower its international military presence across the world and shift towards cyber warfare, considering the recent attacks from foreign adversaries. Russian agents in 2016 hacked DNC computers, released this stolen information, and further compromised election systems in over 7 states.
In fact, in 2018, out of 330 data breaches on the US government, 2/3 were espionage committed by foreign governments, and the US economy has lost $1.2 trillion through stolen intellectual property. However, the US is severely underprepared, as cybersecurity is just 2% of the national military budget. There also must be a higher standard for the extent of military intervention. The US should move away from wars and conflicts based on the acquisition of power, and should only intervene if there is a clear and vital national security threat or an ongoing humanitarian crisis.
However, the US should initially always use diplomacy and international bodies to try to decrease tensions and foster peace before potential military intervention. Thus, the US should try to free itself from the influence of the military-industrial complex and work towards building a more peaceful world. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm very interested in what you had to say about cyber warfare and data breaches. And I'm wondering if you see that the military industrial complex is in any way destined to be heavily involved in this area, given what we know from the past.
Well, I believe that one trending shift we have seen in recent years is tech companies like Microsoft and Google have been taking contracts with the military. For example, Microsoft recently unveiled a $10 billion deal with the military for the HoloLens virtual reality glasses. Thus, we have seen that with this shifting perspective, the military is looking towards the future and is investing with corporations like Microsoft and has brought them into the military industrial complex in order to fund our new technological developments.
In
However,
addition,
we have also been using artificial intelligence to increase a lot of our warfighting capabilities. Brian Shimp, which is CEO of Anduril, which is a prominent company involved with AI in military, said that military struggles with how do I know and how to process it. Therefore, AI is not focused on displacing humans, but rather in decision-making and info processing, as in a report stated by Georgetown University. Therefore, we've seen more investments in projects like the JEDI project, which is a 10-year, $10 billion IT project to revitalize our infrastructure. It would add tactical edge capabilities like incorporating 5G and enterprise cloud, while also improving the efficiency as AI can cycle through data in a matter of hours rather than months, days and months, which would take our trained analysts.
we have also seen an increase in cooperation between the private sector, for example, the technology companies and the US government, as well as the US military. And this is important, is shown through foreign actors as well. For example, China has been accused of hacking the Microsoft and Russia has been accused of hacking the SolarWinds, which is why the cybersecurity is the main front for new generation US military. And according to a Pew Research Center poll in 2020, over 70% of Americans believe that the private sector should play a more important role in military affairs. And this is important because it shows that the US, unlike our adversaries, China and Russia, have a robust private sector that can help innovate our military.
In your prepared remarks, you mentioned globalization, and that seems to be the international policy or diplomacy for the current administration, current presidential administration. The prior president had more of an America first policy. Which do you think should be the policy of the United States and why?
Well, Trump's America First policy has made it so that we've withdrawn a lot of our commitments from international bodies. For example, we withdrew from the UN Human Rights Council. And furthermore, this has allowed powers like China to take the presence in a lot of these diplomatic bodies and further influence developing nations. China took over 4 out of 15 specialized leadership roles in the UN, for example, in the Food and Agriculture Organization. Furthermore, there's also been less commitment to NATO and military operations. Many senior officials have reported NATO relations would be shaky would be uncertain in a second Trump presidency. Therefore, I believe we should have more commitment to our NATO allies and United Nations allies, as this would help us combat a lot of global powers like China and Russia and gain regional allies as we head into this decade.
I disagree with my colleague because according to a Fox News poll, over 50% of Americans believe that the international organizations such as the UN and the WHO, which has delayed information for COVID-19, is untrustworthy and corrupt through linkings with, for example, foreign governments like the Chinese government. So what the Trump administration proposes is to cut off ties between the US and these corrupt international organizations that serve against US and allied interests and create our own international bodies, for example, allowing Taiwan to enter these organizations for a more freedom-loving international body.
However, it is important to note that the COVID-19 pandemic, if it has taught us anything, it is that cooperation is necessary, as a next global pandemic does not see national borders and can attack the nation as a whole. which is why just today President Biden announced he would be giving 60 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine to countries like India, which are having their own surge. As by helping these other countries and cooperating with our allies and adversaries, we can help prevent another global catastrophe that has harmed American businesses so much in the COVID-19 pandemic.
Let me ask a question in the broader sense of Unit 6. In a number of states, there's legislation being proposed that would make voting rights more strict. Why do you think we have that discussion now? And do you think it's a good idea to have stricter voting regulations?
Well, I personally believe that these legislations are acting in their own self-interest, as they want to protect their own Republican their own seats. As according to the Atlantic and a poll conducted, they found that as more people tend to vote, Republican support is dwindled as they have higher voter turnout or have higher voter percentages in low turnout elections. Furthermore, I think this goes back to Federalist 10, where Madison talks about these factions and how these factions can start acting in their own self-interest. So I believe these legislations are acting in their own faction self-interest.
Thank you.
Under what circumstances, if any, should the National Guard be deployed domestically?
So Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress the power to raise and support armies and also provide for forthcalling of the militia. And I think this application should be extremely beneficial in times of crises. We've seen in Hurricane Katrina, the military was extremely instrumental in providing resources for affected victims. In a lot of the forest fires we saw in California, the military, the National Guard was instrumental in helping this resistance. Furthermore, in the vaccine distribution, as we've seen lately, the Department of Defense has released hundreds of officials in places like Texas, California, New Jersey. And we've also seen over 100 type 1 and type 2 teams tasked with administering over 6,000 vaccines per day from mid-March.
In addition, throughout last summer, there were heavy protests in response to the brutal killing of George Floyd, and many Black Lives Matter protesters gathered mostly peacefully, but some anarchists really riled throughout cities. For example, Portland, Oregon, where even the Democratic mayor have now called for increased presence of police and even National Guard in order to keep the peace of the city. So that would be a standard where the National Guard could be used.
However, I do believe we need more investigation into how the National Guard is deployed, as Congress has done with the January 6th riots, where they established investigations and found that the National Guard was not deployed fast enough, and that deficiencies in the security at the Capitol helped allow for the riots and insurrection we saw on January 6th. Thus, I believe that we do need to take a look in the National Guard and see, and to make sure it is applied equally among different adversaries, and that it is not politicized by the government.
Speaking of the military, what are the advantages and disadvantages of having a draft system?
So I would say there's a lot of controversy over having a draft system. As we've seen throughout history, when Lincoln instituted a draft, there was a New York City draft riots, which was one of the most destructive civil destructions over the federal Civil War draft. We saw in the Vietnam anti-war draft, students burn draft cards in defiance, and over 200 student presidents from universities wrote to the White House in protest. And furthermore, going back to the Civil War, it was very ineffective in how we did drafts. People can hire substitutes and could pay out services. And in 1968, in the Gates Commission that was formed by the Nixon administration, there was a lot of recommending to end a draft, as stated by Milton, using Milton Friedman's arguments, those forced to serve would lack a certain passion, and that the condition of the military won't improve unless we're forced to recruit people and forced to recruit skillful fighters. Therefore, I believe we should turn to an all-volunteer military force.
Your generation has a low voting turnout. What can or should we do about that?
Well, I agree with UChicago professor Anthony Fowler that we must implement a mandatory voter system, as this would help to make sure that that voting is a civic duty, and as a citizen's right, they must vote in the federal elections. However, it is important to note that before we can implement such a system, we must address the current barriers to voting, as if we implemented a mandatory voting system right now, African Americans, other minorities, which already find, according to scholar Newkirk, have already faced twice as many barriers to voting. They would disproportionately be fined and may be harmed by mandatory voting. May I finish my thought? And thus, we must first look to fix our system before we can do drastic measures like mandatory voting.
Thanks very much. And now the judges will give you some feedback, and I'll start. First, I thought that your opening statement was very strong. I like the fact that you started out with a definition of what it means to the military-industrial complex means. You went into the some facts about the budget. Actually, I didn't know they had 770 lobbyists, which was quite a startling figure. I really like the way that you kind of talked about the founders, some who opposed a standing army, some who felt that it was necessary. You cited Federalist 4 and others. And then you went on to talk about how that related to kind of current issues. You know, some of the founders' arguments were kind of validated today, some of them were not, and you discussed that. But something I found that was really interesting was you're raising the point about cyber warfare and data breaches, and I really appreciated your answer to my question about, you know, kind of, well, what would be the role of the military industrial complex in this? And where you talked about now the whole idea of tech companies like Microsoft becoming part of this whole, you know, complex. I thought that was really interesting. And then the idea of AI you know, kind of, and then this close cooperation between the government and tech companies and perhaps foreign actors. It's the very complex problem that you raised, and I thought you did a great job of answering it. One of the things I appreciated about you as a team was that you looked at different sides of an issue, but also it comes through that that there are you have differences of in your political perspectives, and you're passionate about them, and yet you're very civil in the way that you know, kind of address them among one another. And I applaud you for that. That's something that we, you know, need more of. There's lots of, you know, differences of opinion out there, but to be able to discuss the issues at a high level like this in a civil way, I think is really important. So I thought you raised some different points than I've heard before, and I really appreciated that. And I thought your insights, your evidence, and everything was quite strong. So great job.
I would just echo a number of things that that Diana said, and that I'd written down, and I won't do that. I'll just start off with some bad grammar, but it's something that we say here in the hills of West Virginia. You done good. I mean, you really done good. I mean, that was well done. You your initial formatted presentation was right on the points, and then as Diana mentioned, you talked about some things that we hadn't heard about, and things that were very intriguing. You know, shifting to more of a cyber warfare. We hadn't heard that before. And then when I asked you the question about the draft, and you went all the way, you know, you went back to Lincoln. I mean, you know, certainly everybody's going to say something about Vietnam, but I mean, you go back to Lincoln and remind us of that situation with the draft back then, and people paying for people to take their place. I just thought you did a very, very good job. And one other thing, and is that it was very conversational. I mean, this wasn't like a hearing, or this wasn't like it was like we were sitting around at a dinner table, and hey, we got a couple questions for you. What do you all think about this? And you just gave us your insight. I particularly as Diana said, liked it, that you respectfully disagreed with one another. And in talking about globalization, you were able to mention something that just happened today. I mean, that shows the impact of social media and our now generation, so to speak. But I mean, that was very impressive that you're mentioning something that just happened earlier today. Overall, I thought you really were impressive, and congratulations to you. But I must add that you cannot let this be the end of the road for you. The end of, you've done this with We the People, and now you're going to be on to something else tomorrow in school and in your community and so forth. Please, you have so much wisdom and so much knowledge and so much leadership. Please continue to utilize that in your communities and in California and in our nation for the rest of your lives. Congratulations to you. Thank you, and good luck to you.
But let me also echo what's been said so far. I thought you did a very good job. I particularly like the fact that you gave us the other side of the advantages of the military-industrial complex. That was a useful addition. Your history of the draft was a useful addition also. Bringing in Federalist 10 and factions on my question, was a unique way to approach that. So I think you all did a good job. Remember, you're in a kind of rarefied atmosphere here in terms of being in the national finals. You're among those educated and aware and informed citizens, and we hope that you'll continue to do that. So get in there and use the information and perceptions that you have.
I'd like to also thank your teacher for doing such a great job. I have to say, this is a very hard year for all of you, and your teacher did a wonderful job, and you deserve an awful lot of credit. Great team.
Thank you all
for
very
your
much for your
feedback.
time.